And we're live. Hello. Good morning. Maybe this works. There we go. Okay, switched to a different internet source, different router. Anyway, sorry if that got a little choppy there in the beginning. Did a really horrible job of planning this one out. Knew I was going to go live, totally forgot to advertise things. So here we are. Sorry about that. Did not post on the Facebook and the Reddit and all of the places that I normally post when I'm going to have a live. So I do not have a ton of questions, but I did get a few questions that came through this week. And as always, if you have questions yourself, please feel free to drop those in the chat. And if I see them, I will get to them. If I don't see them this week, I will get to them next week. And so that's always the rule with these Q&As is if you are watching this at a later date and you have a question, just drop it in the comment section and I tend to get to it the following week. So, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. I will tell you as well, I did, if you missed it, because I don't think that I've talked about it on my channel, started a new channel with a new project that has zero to do with crickets other than I am involved. But so my boyfriend bought a 140-year-old building 75 feet from my building, and we are fixing it up. We are renovating it right now. It is in really, really bad shape, but it has a lot of history. It's right next to City Hall. We're going to turn it into a really cool sort of a setup, but we are working on getting some grant money and doing things like that. But we are documenting the whole process on YouTube. And so that channel is called the 214 Main Project. So far, we've put up 2 episodes. First one is like introductions, and it gives you a tour of the building. We get maybe a little long-winded in the beginning, but you need to know who we are and what we do. If you've never been introduced to him, it's a good way to learn who he is. If you've been around here for a while, you pretty much know who I am. But then we take a tour of what the building looks like right now, and the building is absolutely dilapidated. Can't use it for anything, doesn't have electric or HVAC or anything like that. Well, it has electric, but it's very not safe. HVAC doesn't have HVAC. We have a heated shop that's in the back of it, and the furnace for that area is basically what keeps the whole thing up and moving. The water isn't even turned on. Right now it's so cold that we think that it would maybe freeze, like we'd have some pipes burst if we turned on the water. It's a mess. Anyway, if you are curious about that one, like I said, that is the 214 Main Project. Completely different channel, so we keep the crickets and the renovations separate. But eventually, hopefully, that building will play a part in my business and will be part of my shipping and receiving area. Because my processing facility right now is just so tiny. So if we can figure something out that way, if we can get it up to snuff, good enough that I can use it, that is the goal. And then we're also going to hopefully build an apartment upstairs. So if you've missed that, go check that out. The other thing that has happened this week that's a bit of a bummer, and I'll kind of cover it in one of the questions, but I just wanted to share the experience as it's happened because, cricket farming is something that we are learning as we go. So it has been really frigid cold here in Iowa for the last probably 10 days or so. And so my cricket barn, we are at the point right now where incubation and hatching, and quite frankly, like we should have already been hatched. But because it's been so cold, the cricket barn has been at a little bit of a lower temperature. And then the other issue that I've run into, and I know better, like I've done this enough times, like I know better. I should have done something to mitigate it. I should have noticed the problem. It is way too dry in my cricket barn, and so majority of the substrate ended up drying out. So we had quite a few pinheads hatch, but nowhere near as many as we should. Won't fill up the barn. Probably will have about 24 bins unfilled, so underutilized. So this is a really expensive time of year to have bins sitting empty, and that's really unfortunate. but I'm just glad that we had as many hatch as we did. So that's one of those things. If you are in a cold temperate, like if you are in a northern latitude or like a really far southern latitude, I guess, and part of the year you are dealing with the cold, um, please remember the relative humidity drops, and the timing of that can be really horrible for you if you are like me and just get busy with other things and overlook it. And like I said, that was just a rookie mistake. I knew better than that. So um, that's my foray in crickets right now. But anyway, okay, let's get to the questions. First question I have is, and this one ends up with a few follow-ups and things like that. So hold on. Oh, and Lita, thank you so much for that question. I will get to that one. Let me do this one first, and then I will go to yours right after, because that's super common, and so I definitely want to help you. So first question, I purchased crickets to feed amphibians, and I'm interested in breeding them. I rarely hear males chirp. Why are they not chirping? So immediately when I got this question, I had a follow up, and that was, let me go to the thread. I said, thanks so much for watching. What size crickets are you purchasing? If they aren't fully grown adults, they won't chirp. The males are silent the majority of their lives. And so I think this is for people who are not familiar with crickets and the cricket life cycle and everything. Majority of the population doesn't even realize that it's only the males that chirp. So plus one unknowing that it's the males that are going to chirp. Um, I always say that in a presentation, and people are just their minds are blown when I say it's only the male crickets that are chirping. So here in Iowa in the fall, we get a lot of crickets in the house. People always complain about the chirping crickets, and I tell them, it's the male ones every time. So, so I asked that follow-up question, and so she replied back and said, I ordered about 1,000 half-inch crickets, but I have just few amphibians. They usually last a while. How long would you estimate it would take for them to reach maturity after I receive them? So again, just confirms what I kind of already suspected is she was not purchasing and receiving fully grown adults, which is why she never heard the chirps, and then she had them fed out before they reached maturity. So I don't know necessarily what temperature that she is keeping them at, which is how I would be able to guess on her second question there, which is how long does it take them to reach maturity? Because her goal is eventually to breed these crickets. So I gave her back a hypothetical situation and said, if you're keeping them at room temperature, so 72 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take, it's probably going to take 3 to 4 additional weeks after she purchases those half-inch crickets, because half-inch is about half grown, maybe a little bit more. But it's going to take those crickets in 72-degree temperatures 3 to 4 weeks to start to reach maturity. Now, if you keep them warmer, so if you have with your amphibians, you have a warmer room that's like in the 80s, that's going to be much faster. Like that could be as few as 10 days, I would guess. Again, depending on other conditions. But uh, hopefully that's helpful. So, if your crickets are not chirping and you don't have fully grown crickets, there's no such thing as like miniature adult crickets. They're either fully grown or they're not. And if they're not chirping and they're smaller, they're just not fully grown yet. So, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing anything wrong. It's just a maturity thing. All right, so Lita, I want to get to your question because I just said that I would answer that one next. So I'm super new, but every time I get crickets to start, they die overnight. Can I get some advice to keep them alive? And the other problem is hatching them. Okay, so your crickets are dying overnight. My first question to you would be, what are you doing? What is the environment that you're putting them in after you get them? Uh, Back up completely, and where are you getting them from? So your source, if you're getting them from the same source all the time and they keep dying, um, your source may be diseased, so that might be a problem. That could be number one. Number two, it really depends on how you're keeping them. Like, what are you housing them in? Are you giving them any housing? So, let's just say that you have either a terrarium or a plastic container. I think they call them cricket keepers with the little like tubes that have the crickets come out. Are you putting any sort of hiding spaces for them? So any kind of cardboard, so cardboard or egg cartons or anything like that. Are you putting those in there? Are you giving them a feed source? Are you giving them a water source? The other thing is, how many are you putting in that space? So like, let's just think about like one of those little cricket keepers. Most people are pretty familiar with those. Um, those are tiny. You probably shouldn't put more than 100, 150 crickets in there, and even when you do put those in there, like, you need to make sure you have ample housing for them to have places to go. Housing is probably the most overlooked, key to living that folks who are keeping crickets in the beginning or keeping crickets for the amphibians or reptiles or things like that, that is the most overlooked factor. It's very, very important. It reduces cannibalism, it reduces stress, it all of the things. People I like to think most people notice that they're going to need food and water. If you didn't know that you need food and water on your crickets, 30-gallon tote that I house them in, and I've got them from different places. Okay. Um, so 30-gallon tote, I'm hoping, like I said, I hope that you are putting some sort of housing in there. If you aren't, like, definitely do that. So egg cartons, egg flats, anything cardboard. It can be like cut up cardboard box, just something for them to climb on, something for them to hide in. The next thing, feed them cricket food and water. Okay, good, great. So then temperature wise, well, I should ask, how many are you putting in that 30-gallon tote? Um, Relative to the space that you're giving them. So that would be part of it. The other thing is, if you are getting your crickets shipped, like shipped in, that's very stressful for crickets. So you are going to end up with some dead ones no matter what you do, because the stress of shipping is tough on them. So that's one of those things. Monitor them for like 24 hours, pick out the deads, and the ones that survive should do all right for you. Um, the other thing is what are your temperatures? Yes, egg flats and paper towel rolls. Okay, good, great. So you're doing well so far. I would guess, just based off of that, you're probably getting them shipped in, but that's maybe me making an assumption. The other thing could be is if you are getting them from a pet store and they just got them shipped in, they haven't really had the stress die off yet, possibly, um, would be my guess. Either that or it could be, and I kind of doubt it, but it could be that you brought in a diseased batch at some point and left over some diseased residue that maybe those are picking up when they go into your. I would guess that's probably not the case, but it is a possibility. Um, but so I do want to talk about your other problem that you said. The other problem is hatching them. So my question to you on that one is, um, okay, you get them from a pet store. Yeah, there could be a variety of things on that one then. Um, their source could be diseased. They could have, like I said, most pet stores are getting them shipped in, and so it could be a case of they got them shipped in and they haven't had that initial die off necessarily, and so they sold them to you and then they die within 24 hours. That could be part of it as well. Um, but keep them warm. So if you can keep them in the 80s, that's the best. Don't have them too humid, but don't have them too dry. Make sure that you have enough housing for them, housing, water, food, all of those things. And hopefully that sorts itself out. If it continues to be a recurring problem, I would say maybe change your source of where you're getting your crickets from. And if you change your source, you might want to change like everything in terms of your housing and all that kind of stuff, so that if you have any virus particles or anything like that, you're not carrying them over to a newly healthy population. But I do want to talk about your second part of your question there, which is your other problem being hatching them. To which I would sort of direct you to my videos about hatching, laying, all of those things. What's the best food to give them? So we feed our crickets Bioforge Labs insect diet You can get it off eBay. I don't know where you are in the world, but depending on where you are in the world, you should be able to get it from there. It's 7 miles down the road for us, and it works really, really well. If you don't have access to that, a organic or non-GMO chick starter, so like specifically for baby chickens, will work really well. But stick with the non-GMO or the organic because otherwise you end up with too high of a pesticide residue. But if you can get your hands on the Bioforge stuff, works great. The one thing I also will say about if you go the chick starter route, if it doesn't have any sort of meat in it, which often they don't, if you can mix in some, I think you could probably do like fish feed and things like that that do actually have a meat and a complete protein in them, especially if you're working with a higher population density in the container that you have. That's going to help to reduce cannibalism if you give them a complete protein. So, bouncing all around, go back to your hatching thing. Definitely go check out. I have extended versions of the breeding, the incubation, and the hatching. Those go pretty in depth about all of the things around this. But the main thing is your timing of putting your breeding trays in with your females. You should not just leave a breeding tray in indefinitely. Like if the males aren't chirping and the females don't look fully mature, there's no need for you to have a breeding tray in there. Only bad things will happen if that's the case. Then once you have the timing right and you've gotten some eggs out of them, you should be able to see the eggs. And if you can't see them on the surface, if you can just like cut a little section out and check it out, you should see your breeding substrate should be flush with eggs. At that point, if it's important for you to keep the substrate moist, but not completely like saturated with water. If you have it too wet, the eggs will rot. But if you let it dry out too much, the eggs will dry out and they will not hatch. You can't really rehydrate them necessarily. You can with mealworms, but cricket eggs, once they dry out, they tend to be non-viable. That being said, if you notice like from one day to the next that it dried out, you might be okay. You might still be able to rehydrate them. It's worth a try. So yeah, and then for those, definitely keep them warm. So the warmer the better when you're incubating. Typically, if you can incubate, so like if we grow out at 86 degrees Fahrenheit, if we can incubate at 90, that's all the better. That turns the pinheads very quickly in terms of hatching. Like when we are incubating at 90 or 91 degrees, we can hatch as few as 7 to 8 days. Right now, like I said, with my barn being a lower temperature, we were incubating at like 80 degrees, and some of those hatches have been like 3 weeks. So that is not ideal, but it is what it is. So yeah, I would just make sure that those are in order. Okay, so let me go back to another question. Okay, so this is talking about the what I talked about in the beginning, which was when you are growing in colder climates and if you go through a really cold snap, you're very welcome. Thanks for watching. If you are growing in colder climates and you go through a cold snap, and quite frankly, like this could happen in the southern US as it has been cold there lately. I imagine the relative humidity drop has been quite drastic in the last week for them as well. But here's the question, and it's a bit of a lengthy one, but it gives really good context. So, after learning from your great series videos, I have gone through one life cycle raising crickets. I started with 100 and now have thousands. Awesome. Congratulations. And now have thousands. It was minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit this morning in northern Minnesota. Ugh. So I am using 4 18-gallon totes with heating pads under each one. This is inside my spare room, following your advice to start small. With you being in Iowa, I'm sure that you have experienced the same drops in relative humidity because it gets so cold. Does your relative humidity in your cricket castle get below 45, or do all the watering dishes keep it high enough? I didn't see any humidifier in the tour. My cheap humidistat is reading about relative humidity 14% inside the cricket room. I have a wet sponge in each tote, but it never gets to 45. It doesn't seem to have hurt them any. Not the brooder tote. That's another story. Thank you for sharing your wisdom in such an honest style. Okay. So if you missed my little intro, when this is all done, just go back and watch it. So I had and it was a rookie mistake, and I knew better. We've had really cold weather here in Iowa the last 7 to 10 days. And it was when we were incubating. And that typically, when you're incubating, you want a warmer and more humid environment. It's good for the pinheads when they hatch, and it's good for just making sure that the substrate doesn't dry out before things hatch. Because the substrate dries out before things hatch, things are not going to hatch. So I knew better, and I have a humidifier, and I should have plugged it in and let it run for a while. But the result is I have had quite a bit of substrate dry out. I had a decent amount. I think I have 75 bins hatched worth. Um, so we're probably going to be sitting on maybe 24-ish bins that are empty this round, because the pinheads just didn't hatch because things dried out too much, which was completely mea culpa, my mistake. So yes, when you are in northern latitudes, when it gets super duper cold like this and the relative humidity absolutely tanks, it's not good for anybody. So it's one of those things. Definitely keep an eye on your humidity. Don't be like me. But if in this case, too late is the handle. If in this case you do have that sponge in each of your bins, and if you have the tops on your bins, theoretically you are creating a microclimate there that is going to be much more humid than the surrounding area. Where we run into the problems is we don't necessarily have the microclimates as much. We do with the pinheads when they first hatch, and we put them in the grow out bins. But lately I had been having issues more so with condensation management in my incubators, and so I'd been leaving the tops off, and so it just was a recipe for disaster. It was just a case of me not paying attention enough, and it's my own fault. Let's put it that way. So that is something you definitely do need to keep an eye on, particularly in the more northern latitudes, because lower massive, whoa, massive relative humidity drops like that do impact your crickets. And if it falls at the wrong time, like it did with mine, it can really drastically impact things. Okay, I had another question. Um, Chicken starter I've been able to find is crumble. Do I need, or do they prefer, a finer grind? I haven't yet started farming crickets yet, as it is way too cold for here. Way too cold at the moment here in Michigan. Whew, I can imagine. Spring is on the way soon, though, folks. So the chicken crumble. So they can eat the crumble. They can't eat pellets, which things were pelletized to keep insects out, so that totally makes sense. But they can eat the crumble, but they do not prefer it. Um, so if you can use, like, you can use any sort of mill, even if it's like a flour mill, even if it's a tabletop one. I don't know how large you're planning on starting or small you're planning on starting, but you can take those crumbles that you can find and you can just grind them up. Um, so if you can do that, that is great. Like I said, even the little tiny pinheads will be able to eat the crumble, but it is not efficient for them. So if you are looking for faster growth, if you can grind it into a smaller grind, all the better. But if that's all you have available to you, it will work. It's just maybe not ideal. So let me double check on what other questions I have. I Like I said, this was somewhat of a last minute kind of a thing. I did not mean to do zero advertising for this one. It just kind of happened. So it's been busy with the new building and everything. And I have some other exciting things going on in the background that, if you guys follow my Instagram and things like that, there was a lot of makeup involved for a lot of interviews this week, because I'm casting for a show. So I will try to do better next week. If you are very welcome. If I don't get to your questions this week, like I said, please drop them in the comments and I will get to them next week. I promise. I can't we'll do it same time next week, so 8:30 CS 8:30 Central Standard Time on Sunday morning because this works pretty well for me. So I can go get the cricket chores done, get some production done in the processing facility, and yeah, so, thank you guys for joining. If you're watching this later and you have follow-up questions, please drop them and I will get to them next week. So thanks for coming, guys. Have a great one. Have a good Sunday.